Hey there, Underground Sessions podcast listeners. We're so glad that you've been joining us for some exciting episodes on Season 4. There's more to come, but today we have a very exciting episode with Aimee Huber, the Executive Director of First Choice Women's Resource Center. She was here last season. You may remember that they're going through a very challenging situation. We're going to be talking about the updates on what's going on with them, as well as some ways that you can be involved and pray and just be seeking the Lord in the midst of this. So this is an exciting episode. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. All right, well, I am excited to have this conversation. Aimee, welcome back to the Underground Sessions podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I wish, of course, it can be under better circumstances. Now, you may not know that the last episode we did with you is still our most viewed non-boosted podcast ever, I think is what I was told before. So we put no money behind it, and everybody wanted to see it.
That's very humbling.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to the compelling nature of your story, the work that you're doing, and how God is using you in the midst of a really challenging circumstance. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
For those people that did not see, though, that podcast, there's going to be, I'm sure, a couple. Maybe you can tell folks who you are, what you do, your organization, and then give us a little bit of a sense on really why you're here. Recap what's going on with First Choice. And we'll give an update on the legal situation. And the legal situation, obviously, also, could you introduce our guest that's with us, too?
I'd love to. Lincoln Wilson is here from Alliance Defending Freedom. He's our lead attorney, and we're grateful for him.
Yeah. Thanks for being here, Lincoln. All the way from Idaho. So this is quite the distance here. We have a whole country
I'd love
that's
to hang out with
separating
you
us.
guys in New Jersey, but couldn't make the flight.
I still have not been to Idaho. One of these days I'm going to have to get out there. So, good. All right, so why don't you give us the recap and the update and throw it over to Lincoln where you feel like it's best.
I'd be glad to. I'm Aimee Huber, and for almost 34 years now, I have served at First Choice Women's Resource Centers. We have 5 locations in New Jersey, and we serve women in unplanned pregnancies. So some of our services include pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, options counseling, material support, abortion pill reversals, and after-abortion support and care. And we serve women completely free of charge. And I guess this part of my story started last November when we were issued a subpoena by the Attorney General of New Jersey. We did not know a representative was coming from his office, but he came to our Morristown Center, asked for me, handed me a pile of papers, and it was a subpoena commanding us to produce 10 years of documentation, including donor communications, advertising, and abortion pill reversal. There were no allegations of wrongdoing. It was simply a horrible, oppressive fishing expedition. So that started the story last November, and we've been fighting that ever since.
So that's a good recap. Maybe could you give us a little bit of an update on where you are now? I know there's been some steps that have been taken. There's been some progress, some backward movement. There was a hearing in court just last Friday. So I think we're catching it at a good time to get an update.
Yes. I think I'll throw it to Lincoln to answer that question exactly. But sometimes people say, well, what's the problem? I mean, can't you turn over all of your records? What's the big deal? And my answer is we have nothing to hide, but we have a great deal to protect. We are protective of our personnel and our staff. We are protective of our donor names and their information. We're protective of our client names. And my husband, Drew, actually has a great analogy, I think. It's imagine someone coming to your house and they knock on the door and they say, we'd like to look around. There isn't anything wrong, but we would still like to look around and go through all of your stuff and determine if there is something that you've done that's wrong. And that is just violating and not appropriate in this country. So maybe Lincoln can share about where our case is from a legal standpoint at this point.
Yeah, maybe add some color to that, Lincoln.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I'll tell you, Aimee's case is one that's complex for most lawyers. It should be on a law school exam because of how complex it is in terms of procedure. But it's really been a back and forth between state and federal courts over the same issues. When Aimee got this subpoena, she hired us at Alliance Defending Freedom to represent First Choice in challenging it. And we filed a lawsuit in federal court to challenge it, and the Attorney General opposed, and we said his actions were unconstitutional under the First Amendment. He said his actions were constitutional. Then the federal court said, I don't have the ability to decide this. It said, I can't decide this until a state court holds that this is enforceable. And they said, but the state court will also decide your federal issues, so why don't you just go to state court? Now, we thought that was wrong, but that's what ended up happening. The Attorney General then filed a lawsuit against First Choice in state court, and he said First Choice should be required to give me everything I'm asking. We opposed that. We said the Constitution says that's illegal. He disagreed. And the court in state court said, well, this is allowed as a matter of state law, but I can't decide the federal issues either. I can't decide whether your information is protected by the First Amendment. I can't decide whether he's harassing you. I can't decide whether this violates the Fourth Amendment. And that means that we couldn't get a decision on our claims in federal court, and we couldn't get our decision on our claims in state court. Then the parties agreed, though, that because of that state court ruling, now the federal court can decide the issues. So now we're back in the federal court again, and the federal court is going to decide whether Aimee's information is protected by the First Amendment. It's going to decide whether she's being unfairly targeted by the Attorney General. And in the meantime, the Attorney General is rushing to try to get the state court to force Aimee to give up all her documents before the federal court can even make a decision on whether they're protected. And we had a hearing about that last Friday. We have been complying with some of the Attorney General's demands that we think are within the proper scope of his subpoena, but there are other demands that we think are protected either by state law or by the Constitution, and we're not giving up that information. And so there was a big dispute in state court, and last Friday the state court said, again, it's not going to decide these issues. And it declined to decide the Attorney General's request to force Aimee to turn over protected information, and it declined our request to pause while the federal court moves forward. So we are in a situation now where we're mostly waiting on the federal court to rule, but we're grateful for this pause that we've been given by the state court, and we'll see what happens next. I'll just highlight the most important issue is, as Aimee said, they have nothing to hide, but they have a lot to protect. And that's the identity of their staff and their volunteers, and it's their donors, because the Attorney General says he wants First Choice to turn over 5,000 of its donors, their names, because he says it's necessary for him to conduct his investigation.
Well, that's a bit disconcerting. How long do you think it'll take before you actually get into the federal court? Can that be determined, or is that just an unknown?
We are in the federal court right now, and we're just waiting on a decision. The court took briefing on our motion on an emergency basis, and that meant the briefing was done in a little over 2 weeks. That briefing now has been completely submitted to the court for about a month and a half, so we're just waiting for the court to issue its ruling.
Well, it seems to me this is an important case, not just for Aimee and First Choice, but I could see where this would have broad implications throughout the country. What are you guys seeing at ADF as far as, are there other pregnancy centers like Aimee that are dealing with this? What are the ramifications in the legal system, and is this case really important?
Absolutely it is. Aimee's case is only unique in how complex it is, but it's not unique in terms of what we're seeing from state officials. Next door over in New York's Attorney General had filed lawsuits against 9 pregnancy centers and against Heartbeat International for abortion pill reversal, for marketing or making statements about abortion pill reversal. And we filed a lawsuit against her on behalf of some other pregnancy centers, and we got an injunction declaring that her investigation or her actions were unconstitutional. You've seen the same thing in California. The California Attorney General is going after pregnancy centers and going after both nationwide networks and then also local pregnancy centers. The Washington Attorney General is investigating another network of pregnancy centers. And then there's several others that are going after individual doctors or who are issuing consumer alerts saying that pregnancy centers are deceptive and you shouldn't go to pregnancy centers. You should go to abortion clinics. It's the sort of thing that, not only is it a harm to the cause of life, but it's fundamentally a First Amendment problem because it's state officials weighing in against these organizations, harassing them because of their speech and their pro-life views, not because they've done anything that violates the law.
Well, good. That's a really good summary, and I think that lets us know about the gravity of what's going on. Aimee, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn back to you, and Lincoln, you can of course weigh in on this one. But it seems to me that one of the reasons this is such a vitriolic issue is that abortion has become front and center since the Dobbs decision in 2022. Certainly, is a lot of language about this has been going on in this election cycle, and I think for Christians, there's probably some dissatisfaction on both parties. One side is very, very, very abortion focused. The other side has sort of minimized the pro-life language that was in their platform, and so I guess my question is, how do we think that through? If you're a pro-life advocate that's listening to this this podcast here, how do you think through how to just process everything that's going on in this abortion conversation in the current culture?
I can tell you how I think it through as Aimee Huber,
please.
Independent citizen, at least. Are both parties lacking in some way when it comes to the sanctity of human life? Yes, I would say so. What I do is look at the record. I look at the policies. I look at what's happened in the past to determine which party is going to represent me as well as possible when it comes to the sanctity of human life. And I think that's what's important. I am not voting for a person. I am voting for policies. I am voting for judges. I am voting for a seat at the table and an administration that I think would welcome my voice and my convictions. And is it perfect? No. But we live in a broken world, and we've got to seek God and live by our convictions as much as possible in this difficult season.
What's been some of the challenging messaging on abortion that you've heard? I'm thinking recently there was a story about this Georgia woman and blaming lack of abortion care on her death, and then other people will say, well, no, it actually was a result of her taking abortion pills. Right. That was something that was in the news recently. But is there other messages out there that are just flat out not true that you're hearing?
One message that is flat out not true is that women who have miscarriages in pro-life legislated states are not going to get care, that it's the same as abortion. A miscarriage is not the same as abortion. There is no state in which a woman would not receive care from a miscarriage. That's just a lie. When it comes to the Georgia woman, it's so sad, but it is being twisted and changed. And the fact is that the abortion pill has no constraints on it anymore. It did have REMS, which are risk education mitigation strategies, which I understand is prevalent in any medical procedure, but those were removed. So what has happened is that the abortion pill has been disconnected from a medical professional. So women receive it in their mailbox, they obtain it online, and they do an abortion in their bathroom. Well, of course there are going to be difficulties and risks with that. I can tell you that some of the saddest calls that we receive at First Choice are from women who had an abortion and they're not sure because they're still bleeding and it's been weeks and they don't know what to do. And so we tell them, please go back to the doctor that did the abortion that gave you the pills. Well, I don't have one. I got them online. It is so sad because there's not a medical professional overseeing that at all. And it's my understanding also that data is not collected from women who suffer harm from abortion pills unless there is a death. They don't collect that data. If she hemorrhages, if she goes to the emergency room, if she has difficulties, it's not collected. So there is so much misunderstanding, and it's difficult to hear.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, it sounds to me from talking with you, and we were at the courthouse last Friday, maybe going back to one comment Lincoln had mentioned about the, you said Aimee's case is super complex compared with others. I did not get in the courtroom. We stayed out and we were praying for what was going on in there. But the people that came out told me, wow, that was super technical. So I don't know exactly what the technicalities were in terms of the argumentation you were doing. But apparently it's very complicated. But the thing that I was thinking as we were standing outside praying, and that's not an experience I've had recently, it was just encouraging to see how many folks had shown up to support you and First Choice and what was going on there. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the stories, any stories of support that you've seen in the midst of this, because I know a lot of folks are aware of what's going on.
Yes, well, I think of the scripture about how what the enemy intended for evil, God will use for good. And we've seen that. We had a very encouraging and accurate article printed in the Wall Street Journal in August. And what was interesting with that is that I know that it went across the nation because we received donations the next day from people in other states. That wouldn't have happened without this battle. That wouldn't have happened without that article. So through the process, you just realize that you've got to trust God, that He's going to use it all for His glory and for your good. And that's what we're praying.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking of... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it was really helpful and really encouraging to me, too, to see such strong support for Aimee at the hearing last Friday. And you never know how these things make a difference, but just to put some color on it for the listeners, this was a situation where First Choice told people it had this big hearing happening in New Jersey State Court, and so many supporters showed up that only probably less than half of them could even get into the courtroom. And that's a powerful thing to show courts in those situations, is that there are many others beside the parties who are standing behind them in that situation. And it's something that people can do whenever they see people being persecuted like this and harassed, is go out and stand and support them. Be there, stand up for what's good and what's righteous.
Yeah, that's a good word. I also was thinking, having not been able to get in and being on the praying end on the outside, that we are exhorted within scriptures to pray for those that are in authority, and I think God hears those prayers, and every time we bring them before Him, we can think it doesn't make a difference, but in reality it does. God is the one who controls. He's sovereign. He controls history. He can bend the ear of kings and queens and all of that. And so prayer is super important, and I know there's a lot of people that are praying for you. So Lincoln, you sort of touched on this before, but I wonder if you could just recap again. Where are we going to go from here? What are the next steps on the legal front? And, how can we specifically be praying to that end and be aware of that end? Is there anything that we that are not on First Choice staff that we can do in addition to showing up?
I think mostly praying and supporting at future hearings is going to be important. We are hoping for a ruling on our motion in the federal court very soon, where the court will decide whether or not Aimee has been unlawfully harassed by the Attorney General and whether the identities of her donors and her personnel are protected by the First Amendment. Those are the big decisions that are going to be before the federal court. We hope to win on that, but whichever way it goes, there's likely to be appeals going through the federal system. And at the same time, there's going to be an appeal process that's working out in the state system because of the state court decisions that have happened in this case so far. And those two legal systems are tapping and intersecting with one another, which is what makes this case complex. I'm hoping part of the reason it's been complex is that no court has really got down and decided the federal issues. They haven't decided whether there's constitutional protection here. But once a court does that, that's going to be something that kind of gives it the ability to take control of this litigation, and hopefully we'll see it simplify on some level and become more about what's really going on here. Is this unlawful campaign of harassment against Aimee? And just to be clear, Aimee's case of all the ones around the country, hers is one of the most clear examples of this harassment because the Attorney General had specifically asked Planned Parenthood to help him draft his alert against pregnancy centers, warning people about pregnancy centers. He said, Planned Parenthood, give me some tips on this. When Planned Parenthood is basically the ideological opposite of what First Choice is doing. It really showed his cards, and we think that is evidence that pretty clearly shows what is really going on here.
Good. Well, even in the midst of that, I've been amazed, Aimee, on how many different, for at least from my perspective, how many doors have opened up for you. And I mentioned at a sermon on Sunday, Dave and I were at the Colson Center National Conference back in June, and you were able to be there as one of the spotlighted clients of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And there was thousands of people there that got to hear about your story and what God is doing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the doors that God has opened up for you that maybe I don't even know about. I know you were at an ADF conference, but what has that been like for you?
Yes, I spoke at 3 ADF events, and last week I recorded a podcast with the Colson Center called Strong Women. And so it's been a surprise, honestly. It's not anything that I sought, just like this subpoena isn't anything that I sought, but I'm just trying to be faithful to God and walk through the doors that He gives me to walk through. So it's really been a joy. Pregnancy centers do such incredible work that if I can share more of what we do and how we help women and how we are being harassed and targeted, then I'm glad to do that. And I'm just grateful to the Lord for the opportunities and pray that He would find me faithful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very cool. One of the things that you said, and I don't remember if it was at that conference or if it was just in a conversation, but it was something to the effect that you're praying that, so you went to this hearing on Friday and you didn't get a final decision. You're praying to the effect that God will allow you to go as far as you need to go to get a final verdict. And
yes.
Am I quoting you correctly, or am I just making that up?
No, it's pretty close. I think I said that the Lord had been gracious to show me a few months ago when I wished that this was all over, that, Aimee, my glory will be greater the longer this goes, and in a sense. And could this be done now, and would that make me happy? Absolutely. But I don't want a short-term relief and then have other pregnancy centers harassed and targeted the way we are. I want this to go as far as it needs to go for God to receive the greatest glory and for pregnancy centers to be protected. And I'm trusting that He will give me all that I need, because it is a marathon, not a sprint. I'm realizing that. It definitely is.
And in a lot of ways, I think it's natural to feel, I wish it was done.
Sure.
Why can't it just be done tomorrow? But you don't know how God is refining you, how He's shaping you, how He's using you in the midst of this trial, this tribulation that you're experiencing. And so I think you've been a wonderful model for many folks as a result of that.
Thank you.
How can we pray for you? You specifically, the staff at First Choice, what are the specific things that we should be lifting up?
Pray for endurance and perseverance. Pray that the Lord will give me the words to speak and the heart with which to speak them. Pray for our staff, that they will continue to be encouraged and to know that this battle is worth fighting. And every time I and they see a woman return with her baby that we didn't think would be born, we always realize that it's worth it. Every time, it's worth it. So pray for our legal team. They are amazing. We are so grateful for Alliance Defending Freedom. The blessing of seeing them work and watching them work and praying and seeking God together has just been a joy. So pray for the other pregnancy centers as well in the state and in the nation to be protected. and pray for God to receive glory. That's the greatest prayer.
Yeah, those are good prayers. Thank you for making that very clear for us. Well, that's all the questions that I have, but I'll give both of you the final word. What's maybe the last thing that you would exhort our audience with before we wrap up today?
Lincoln, you have something while I think?
I'll just say that this is a clear situation where when you're preaching the truth, the world and the devil hates the truth, and they will work to silence that. And when there are people out there who are willing to speak the truth courageously, like Aimee, it's important that others stand behind them and work to support them in that situation. So I'd ask people to pray for her and for our efforts to defend that and the right that we have to speak the truth in this country. It's an important one to defend, and the more that you can work to defend that, the better. We're looking forward to a court being courageous enough to stand up and to protect those rights, and I hope that we'll see good things in Aimee's future soon.
And thank you to you, Lincoln, and Alliance Defending Freedom for just the good work that you're doing. You are really stepping into the battle lines, if I can say that, on multiple really important fronts. And so we're just thankful for you. We're actually here at the church. We're part of your ministry alliance, and so we've called up a few times with different questions as well. And so thank you for your ministry and for what you give there.
I think sorry, Lincoln. I think of a verse in Psalm that's one of my favorites, and it says, "Be strong and wait for the Lord. I am confident of this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Be strong and wait for the Lord. Wait for the Lord." And so in this battle, just as in other battles that we face as Christians and other trials and ways that we need to endure, God is always faithful. And when we are willing to submit to Him in the journey, so often in my life, He brings the breakthrough at the end. And if I had cut short the journey or the challenge in the beginning, then I wouldn't have seen Him at the end. And I don't want to be responsible for that. So may I be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord and wait for the Lord, just like everyone who's listening to this podcast, because He's good, He's faithful. We don't always understand what's happening, but at the end, so many times we do have eyes to see what He was doing, and it's worth it. It's worth it every time.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for being here. Those are
you.
some wonderful words. I hope for those of you that are listening, that gave you a sense on what's currently happening with First Choice, and we're looking forward to the day when we can have you come on and this can be finally done, and God can get the glory for that. So we'll have to schedule that for hopefully in the near future.
That will be a great day.
We'll see how the Lord works there. So thanks so much for being here,
Thank
Aimee,
you, Bob.
Lincoln. Thanks for coming here from Idaho. We appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for your support at the hearing.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next time on the Underground Sessions podcast.